Cain walked east, away from the presence of the Lord, away from everything he'd ever known, and he settled in a place the Bible calls the land of Nod. Most people hear that and picture exile, banishment, a man wandering aimlessly through wasteland, cursed to drift until he dies, God's reject, heaven's castaway, stumbling through nothing toward nowhere. And that reading has held for thousands of years. It's in the paintings, it's in the sermons, it's in the cultural DNA of how we understand punishment. But what if I told you the Hebrew doesn't say what you think it says? What if the land of wandering wasn't a wasteland at all, but a curriculum? Not a dumping ground for the damned, but a training ground for the broken? What if Cain didn't walk into exile? He walked into a classroom. Stay with me, because when you see what God actually built into that sentence, you'll never read exile the same way again. To understand where Cain went, you have to understand what God actually said to him, because the sentence is more precise than most people realize. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Two Hebrew words here. Na, a fugitive, one who is shaken loose, and nad, a wanderer, one who moves. Together, they paint a picture, not of chaos, but of displacement. You will be shaken from where you were, and you will move. But here's what most readers miss. Na doesn't only mean aimless drifting. The root appears elsewhere in Scripture, and when it does, it carries motion with texture. The same root shows up in descriptions of birds, a flutter of wings, the restless movement that isn't panic, but search. It shows up in mourning rituals, the swaying of grief, which is not random, but rhythmic, purposeful. God didn't say, wander until you disappear. He said, you will be moved. There's a difference between being thrown away and being relocated, and everything about the structure of Cain's sentence suggests the second. But let's not romanticize this. Exile is brutal. Cain's entire identity was built on the ground. His name, Cain, means smith, the one who shapes, the one who forges from raw material. He was a farmer, a maker, a man whose hands knew the language of soil, and God severed that connection completely. The ground will no longer yield to you its strength. Imagine the thing you do best, the skill that defines you, the craft that gives your life structure. And then imagine it simply stops responding to you. You plant, and nothing grows. You build, and it crumbles. You reach for the thing that always caught you, and your hands close on air. That is what exile does. It doesn't just remove you from a place, it removes you from yourself. And Cain knew it. When he heard the sentence, he didn't argue about the geography. He said, my sin is too great to be forgiven. He saw the exile and read it as erasure, as God writing him out of the story. Most of us would read it the same way. But God wasn't writing Cain out. He was writing Cain into a different chapter. Now look at what happens next in the text, because this is where the standard exile narrative falls apart. Genesis 4:16. Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. He settled. The Hebrew is yashav, to sit down, to dwell, to inhabit. This isn't a man stumbling through sand dunes. This is a man who arrives somewhere and stops, who finds ground, different ground, and makes it his. And the name of the place, Nod. Translators render it the land of wandering. And technically they're correct. But the construction is strange. It's not a land for wandering. It's the land of wandering, as if wandering itself is the geography, as if the movement is the point, not the punishment. Think about that. God didn't send Cain to a place called the land of suffering or the land of the forgotten. He sent him to a place named after the process itself, the wandering, the searching, the restless motion of a man who has lost his footing and has to learn to walk differently. In every other ancient legal system, exile was the last step before execution. You were cast out so you would die where no one had to watch. But in Genesis, exile operates differently. It operates the way it will operate for every major figure God shapes after Cain. Abraham, called out of Ur into a land he'd never seen. He wandered for decades before the promise materialized. Moses, exiled to Midian for 40 years. A prince reduced to a shepherd. And in that desert, God spoke from a burning bush. David, hunted through the wilderness of Judah, sleeping in caves, running from the king he was anointed to replace. And in those caves, he wrote the Psalms. Israel, 40 years in the desert. Not because God forgot them, because the desert was doing something to them that Egypt never could. The pattern is everywhere. God uses exile the way a metallurgist uses fire, not to destroy, but to separate what's essential from what's not. The wandering isn't the waste. The wandering is the work. So here's the mercy hidden inside the judgment. God didn't exile Cain to destroy him. He exiled him to dismantle the version of Cain that could kill his brother and lie about it. The ground stopped responding because Cain needed to stop defining himself by what he could extract from it. The wandering didn't end because Cain needed to learn that identity isn't a location, it's a direction. The land of Nod wasn't empty. It was full of exactly what Cain needed, and nothing that he wanted. That's the signature of divine curriculum. It never feels like grace in the moment. It feels like loss, like punishment, like God has turned his back. But look at the evidence. God didn't delete Cain from the narrative. He gave him the mark, divine protection. He let him settle. He let him build. He let him father a son and name a city after that son. The line of Cain goes on to produce the first musicians, the first metalworkers, the first herdsmen. Brilliance and beauty emerging from exile. If God wanted Cain erased, the text would have ended at Genesis 4:12. But it doesn't. It keeps going. Because exile in God's economy is never the final word. It's the first word of a sentence that takes a lifetime to finish. You know what the land of Nod feels like. You've been there. Maybe you're there right now. The job that defined you, gone. The relationship that anchored you, severed. The version of yourself you thought was permanent, dismantled by something you did, or something that was done to you. And every morning you wake up in a geography you didn't choose, and the voice that crouches at your door whispers, "This is where God sends people he's done with." But exile is not evidence of abandonment. Exile is evidence that God is rearranging the furniture of your identity, and he needed you out of the old house to do it. The ground isn't yielding because you were never meant to build your life on that ground. The wandering hasn't stopped because you haven't arrived yet, not because there's nowhere to arrive. Nod isn't a wasteland, it's a workshop. And the fact that you're still breathing, still moving, still restless, that's not a curse, That's the curriculum doing its work. The land of wandering was never empty. It was full of everything Cain needed to become someone other than a murderer. God didn't cast Cain into the void. He enrolled him in something, stripped him of the identity that produced violence, placed a shield over him so the process wouldn't kill him, and set him walking, not toward nothing, but through something. Every exile in Scripture follows this pattern. The wilderness is never wasted time. It's where the forging happens, where the heat does what comfort never could. So if you're in your nod season, if the ground isn't responding, if the old life isn't working, if you feel like you've been relocated to a place that has no name except movement itself, don't mistake the curriculum for the punishment. Because the God who marked Cain for protection is the same God who filled the desert with manna, the same God who spoke from the bush, the same God who turns exile into exodus. The land of wandering was never empty, and neither is yours. Subscribe to Faith Through Fire, because the darkest seasons in Scripture are hiding the brightest formation.